In 1957, a group of investors bought a sheep pasture in Colorado for next to nothing. No lifts, no lodge, just grass, rock, and a mountain nobody had skied on. Today, that pasture is called Vail, and it's part of a company worth more than the GDP of some small countries. So, somewhere between the sheep and the billions, somebody figured out something the rest of us missed. This isn't a story about skiing. It's a story about how you turn a cold, empty mountain into one of the most ruthlessly profitable pieces of real estate on Earth. And it starts with a number that should scare off anyone sane. $200 million. That's roughly what it costs to build a serious modern ski resort from scratch before a single guest ever clips into a pair of skis. And yet, decade after decade, people with real money, people who could put that same fortune into apartment buildings or index funds, keep choosing mountains instead. To understand why, you have to go back to that original bet on Vail, because the same logic that built it still runs every major resort operating today. The founders of Vail didn't have the money to build much at first. A couple of lifts, a small lodge, and a plan. What they were really buying wasn't a ski hill, it was land nobody else wanted yet, in a location people would eventually pay a fortune to be near. That's the first thing you need to understand about this business. The mountain is almost a side project. The real asset is everything you can build around it. Now, building around a mountain is not cheap, and this is where most people underestimate what they're getting into. A single high-speed chairlift runs somewhere between $3 and $6 million installed, and a mid-sized resort needs at least 6 to 10 of them. Snowmaking, the artificial backup for when nature doesn't show up, can add another $20 to $50 million in pipes, pumps, and machines. Grooming equipment, $500,000 per machine with a fleet of a dozen or more. Add the lodges, the parking, years of permitting battles with local governments who don't always want a mega resort in their backyard, and you understand why very few individuals ever attempt this alone. Vail Resorts has spent over $1 billion just acquiring and upgrading properties over the last 10 years. This is a business for people who can survive being wrong for a very long time before being right. So here's the question worth sitting with. If lift tickets are the product, why does almost none of the real money come from lift tickets? A day pass at a major resort now runs somewhere around $150 to $250, and it feels like pure profit walking through the gate. But ask yourself what actually happens once you're on the mountain. You park in a garage the resort owns, you rent gear from a shop the resort owns, your kid takes a lesson the resort runs, you eat an overpriced lunch at a lodge the resort built, you sleep in a condo the resort developed, or one nearby that exists only because the resort made the land valuable. Every single one of those is a separate business stacked on top of the first one, and together they typically bring in 2 to 3 times what the lift ticket alone generates. The ticket isn't the product. The ticket is the door. And once you're through that door, the resort has already won the harder battle, which is getting you to come back before winter even arrives. This is where the industry pulled off its cleverest move, the season pass. For somewhere around $800 to $1,000, you get access to dozens of mountains for the entire winter, months before the first snowflake falls. It looks like a deal for you. For the resort, it's something closer to a loan you gave them for free. Guaranteed cash collected in advance, whether the season turns out great or terrible. Vail's Epic Pass and its rival, the Ikon Pass, didn't just add a new product, they quietly turned a business that used to gamble on weather every single winter into something that behaves more like a subscription service. That single shift is arguably the reason half the resorts still open today survived the bad years that closed everyone else. But don't get too comfortable, because for every dollar this business pulls in, the mountain finds a way to take some of it back. Take a breath here, because the next part isn't a list of expenses. It's the part of the story where you start to see how thin the margin for error actually is. When nature doesn't deliver enough snow, and increasingly it doesn't, resorts have to manufacture their own winter overnight, and a single night of running snow guns across a mountain can burn through an estimated $15,000 in electricity and water. Do that for weeks at a time across an entire season, and you start to see why a warm December isn't just bad weather to these businesses, it's a direct hit to the bank account. Then there's the staff nobody thinks about when they picture a ski trip. A single resort might employ anywhere from 500 to 3,000 seasonal workers, lift operators, ski patrol, instructors, cooks, and most mountain towns don't have anywhere near enough housing for them. Some resorts have started building entire employee dormitories just to keep from losing staff mid-season to a town where a one-bedroom rents for $3,000 a month. Add liability insurance for a sport where broken bones are a daily occurrence and constant maintenance on machinery that never really stops aging, and the picture becomes clear. This business doesn't have a slow, gentle cost structure. It has costs that show up whether you had a good week or a terrible one. Which brings us to something the resort industry understands better than almost anyone, and it has nothing to do with snow. It's psychology. Nobody actually needs to ski. It's cold, it's expensive, and you could just as easily stay home. So resorts don't sell skiing. Not really. They sell the fireplace after, the view from the deck, the identity of being someone who does this. That's why the marketing rarely shows someone actually falling down a slope and almost always shows someone laughing over a drink with a mountain behind them. You're not buying a lift ticket, you're buying a version of yourself. And once you've bought that $800 season pass, something interesting happens in your head. You feel like you have to use it. So you drive up on a Saturday, even when you're exhausted, even when the conditions are mediocre, because not going feels like throwing money away. Economists have a name for this, the sunk cost trap. And ski resorts didn't invent it, but they may be one of the industries that benefits from it the most.
Here's where the story gets genuinely risky, though, because none of this works if the mountain stops cooperating. And the mountain is starting to stop cooperating. Some lower elevation resorts in the Northeast United States and parts of the Alps have already seen their operating seasons shrink by an estimated 2 to 3 weeks over the past decade. And because so much of a resort's cost is locked into fixed infrastructure, lifts, snowmaking systems, year-round staff, there's very little room to adjust when a season goes badly. A restaurant can shrink its menu in a slow month. A mountain still has to run its lifts whether 10 people show up or 10,000. This is exactly the risk that pushed the industry toward consolidation, and it's why that small sheep pasture from 1957 eventually became part of a company that now owns more than 40 mountains across multiple countries. Owning one resort means one bad winter can wipe out your year. Owning 40 means a disappointing season in Colorado might be offset by a great one in Utah or Switzerland. It's not really an ambition to get bigger for its own sake, it's a hedge against something no executive can control, the weather itself. And it's exactly why small, independent resorts across the American Midwest have been quietly closing for the past 20 years, not because people stopped wanting to ski, but because they couldn't survive 2 or 3 bad winters in a row without that kind of geographic safety net. Look at what Aspen Skiing Company did with this same insight, but pushed even further. Rather than compete on price, they leaned entirely into luxury, real estate, fine dining, 5-star, everything. Understanding that in a town like Aspen, the land itself can be worth more than the entire skiing operation combined. It's the same lesson from the sheep pasture, just taken to its most extreme conclusion. The mountain was never the business. The mountain was the reason people showed up to buy everything around it. Which is exactly where most people who dream about owning a resort get it wrong. They budget for the lifts and forget the fixed costs never sleep, whether it snows or not. They build for winter and leave summer empty, ignoring that mountain biking and hiking could fill half the calendar. Most resorts leave dead. And the costliest mistake of all is building without a real answer for a warmer future, because a mountain at the wrong elevation without a serious snowmaking budget isn't really a business plan. It's a bet against the climate, and every year that bet gets more expensive to make. So after the billion-dollar acquisitions, the snowmaking bills, the insurance, the housing for 3,000 seasonal workers, what's actually left over?
For a well-run major resort, profit margins typically land somewhere between 10 and 20%, which sounds unremarkable until you remember the revenue underneath it. Vail Resorts alone generates an estimated $2 billion a year across its properties. Thin margins applied to enormous scale is how you end up with a business this valuable built on something as fragile as snow. That sheep pasture in Colorado is still there, technically, buried somewhere under lifts and lodges and condos worth more than most people will earn in a lifetime. Nobody remembers it as a pasture anymore. They remember it as Vail. And that's really the whole story of this industry in one image. Give the right person an empty, unwanted mountain, and they won't just find a way to sell you the snow, they'll find a way to sell you everything around it and convince you to come back for it, year after year, whether it snows or not.